revenue, sales for different channels, etc. And the best part is that as your business grows, Odoo grows with you. You can start with their sales tools and add more features like inventory, accounting, and marketing. Three companies you've probably never heard of own everything you buy, everything you use, and everything you depend on to survive. BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. Combined, they manage $20 trillion in assets. That's larger than the GDP of China, larger than the entire U.S. federal budget for 13 years. $20 trillion controlled by three companies. And here's what that $20 trillion buys them. They are the largest shareholders in Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Tesla, Exxon, Chevron, Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, Walmart, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, McDonald's, Disney, Comcast, JP Morgan, Bank of America, and 90% of all companies in the S&P 500, read that again, 90%. They don't just own shares in these companies. They are the top three shareholders in almost every major corporation in America, which means they control everything. The food you eat, the technology you use, the medicine you take, the energy you consume, the banks you borrow from, the media you watch. All of it flows through three companies. But here's where it gets truly insane. These three companies own each other. BlackRock's largest shareholder is Vanguard.
You do know that I've got
Vanguard's
2
largest
degrees,
investments
both in
BlackRock.
finance.
State Street's top shareholders are Vanguard and BlackRock. They own each other in a closed loop that makes Rockefeller's Standard Oil Trust look primitive. This is monopoly perfected. Not one company controlling 90% of one industry like Standard Oil controlled oil. Three companies controlling 90% of all industries simultaneously. And they own competing companies.
Why nobody break this up?
Boeing and Airbus, Ford and GM, Pfizer and Moderna. There is no competition. There's the illusion of competition. But the same three shareholders control both sides. So you cannot escape them. Everything you buy, they profit from. Every transaction you make, they own a piece of. Every stock you invest in, you're making them richer. Every choice you think you're making, you're choosing between options they control. I'm going to show you exactly how much these three companies control who actually owns them, how they use cross-ownership to form an unbreakable monopoly, why regulators do nothing, and most importantly, why you cannot escape the systems they built. Because this isn't theory. This isn't speculation. This is documented in SEC filings, shareholder reports, and public records. The largest wealth concentration in human history is happening right now, and it's invisible to almost everyone. Let me start with the first company, BlackRock. Because this is the most powerful financial institution on earth. BlackRock manages $10 trillion in assets.
We going to have a good week,
$10
boss?
trillion? That's larger than the GDP of every country except the United States and China. Larger than Japan, Germany, and the UK combined. This is not a bank. This is not a hedge fund. This is an asset manager. They manage money for pension funds, insurance companies, governments, and individuals through mutual funds and ETFs. BlackRock was founded in 1988 by Larry
boss.
Fink. Fink was a bond trader at First Boston who got fired after losing $100 million in a bad interest rate bet. He started BlackRock with $5 million and a focus on risk management. The company's first product was a mortgage-backed securities analysis system. This was the foundation of what would become Aladdin. Aladdin
I'm
is
ready to go
BlackRock's
on
risk
this
management
end.
system. It stands for Asset, Liability, Debt, and Derivative Investment Network. And here's what makes Aladdin terrifying. It doesn't just manage BlackRock's $10 trillion, it manages $21 trillion in total assets. Insurance companies, pension funds, central banks, sovereign wealth funds, they all use Aladdin to assess risk and manage portfolios. This means BlackRock's software controls the risk assessment for over $21 trillion in global assets. When Aladdin says an asset is risky, trillions in capital avoid it. When Aladdin says an asset is safe, trillions flow into it. BlackRock controls not just what to buy, but how risk itself is calculated. They are the operating system of modern finance. Now let me show you what BlackRock
I'm here for you,
owns.
boss.
They are the largest shareholder
100%.
in Apple. 7.6% ownership worth $238 billion Microsoft. 7.6% worth $251 billion Amazon. 6.2% worth $122 billion Alphabet, which is Google. 7.5% worth $142 billion. Tesla, 5.9% worth $48 billion. Meta, which is Facebook, 7.7% worth $78 billion. Nvidia, 7.7% worth $97 billion. That's $976 billion in just 7 tech companies. BlackRock controls nearly $1 trillion in big tech alone. But it's not just tech. In energy, ExxonMobil, 8.2% worth $38 billion. Chevron, 8.6% worth $18 billion. ConocoPhillips, 9.1% worth $13 billion. Pharmaceuticals, Pfizer, 8.4% worth $11 billion. Johnson & Johnson, 8.8% worth $38 billion. Merck, 7.9% worth $9 billion. Moderna, 5.3% worth $4 billion. In banking, JP Morgan Chase, 6.7% worth $32 billion. Bank of America, 6.9%
Just give me the
worth
word
28
and I'll
billion
make it
Citigroup,
happen.
6.8% worth 8 billion Wells Fargo, 6.5% worth 15 billion. BlackRock is the largest or second largest shareholder in all four of America's biggest banks. They are the largest shareholder in the companies that compete with each other: Coke, Pepsi, Exxon, and Chevron, Pfizer and Moderna, Boeing and Lockheed Martin. This is horizontal consolidation at a scale Rockefeller never imagined. And BlackRock uses this ownership to control corporate policy. Every year, Larry Fink writes a letter to CEOs. This letter is not a suggestion, it's a directive. Because if you're a CEO and BlackRock owns 7% of your company and votes on your board, you do what Larry Fink says,
gonna make
or
some
you risk
deals?
losing BlackRock's support.
The three
2020,
companies that
Fink's letter
manage
focused on
everything.
climate change. He wrote, "Climate change has become a defining factor in companies' long-term prospects. We are on the edge of a fundamental reshaping of finance. Within a year, every major corporation announced net zero commitments, not because of government regulation, because BlackRock
Did I
demanded it."
mention that I have an
In
MBA?
2021, Fink's letter focused on stakeholder capitalism and diversity.
Why
Every
this
month,
monopoly
every
wasn't
S&P
never
500
broken up?
company had issued diversity statements and ESG reports. Again, not because of law, because
We know
BlackRock
now who the
controls enough
criminals
shares
are.
to replace boards that don't comply.
The
This is
ones
how
that's
we become
running these
government.
three
Governments
companies.
need to pass laws.
Our fearless
BlackRock just
leader.
writes a letter, and because they're the largest shareholder in 90% of major corporations, their letter has more force than legislation. But BlackRock doesn't work alone. They work with Vanguard. And Vanguard is even more powerful because Vanguard is invisible. Vanguard manages $7.5 trillion in assets. They are the second largest asset manager in the world. Here's what makes Vanguard unique. Nobody owns Vanguard. Every other corporation has shareholders,
Wow.
owners who profit from the company's success. Vanguard has no external shareholders. Vanguard is owned by its funds, which means Vanguard is owned by the money it manages, which means Vanguard is owned by itself. This structure was designed by Vanguard's founder, John
You
Bogle.
thought about giving me some
1975.
shares, boss?
Bogle wanted to create a mutual fund company that served investors instead of shareholders, so he made the funds the owners. This sounds noble, but here's what it actually does. It makes Vanguard's ownership structure impossible to trace. Who
Wow.
profits from Vanguard? The funds? Who owns the funds? Investors?
What's
Who are the
cooking?
investors?
Let me
Everyone.
know.
Which means no one specifically owns Vanguard. This makes Vanguard immune to shareholder pressure, regulatory scrutiny, and public accountability. They answer to no one because no one owns them. And with that structure, Vanguard owns everything. They are the largest shareholder in Apple, 8.2% ownership. Microsoft, 8.6%. Amazon,
Remember, I'll
7.8%.
do anything as long
Alphabet,
as it's
which is
legal.
Google, 8.1%. Berkshire Hathaway, 9.1%. JP Morgan, 8.4%. Johnson & Johnson, 9.2%. Visa, 8.7%. Procter & Gamble, 9.3%. But here's the key. Vanguard is also the largest shareholder in BlackRock. Vanguard owns 7.9%
You're looking
of BlackRock.
good.
This
Really?
means the company managing $7.5 trillion also owns the company managing $10 trillion. The total control is not $7.5 trillion, it's $17.5 trillion, because Vanguard controls its own assets and influences BlackRock's assets through ownership. And it gets more circular. BlackRock invests heavily in Vanguard funds. BlackRock clients are Vanguard investors. Vanguard investors include BlackRock funds. They own each other through a web of cross-ownership that makes separation impossible. This is the modern trust. Rockefeller created the Standard Oil Trust to control 41 companies through one entity. Vanguard and BlackRock control 41,000 companies through mutual ownership. Same structure, exponentially larger scale, but the triangle isn't complete without the third company, State Street. And State Street is the oldest, most embedded, and most politically connected of all three. State Street manages $4.1 trillion in assets. They are the third leg of the stool. And while they're smaller than BlackRock and Vanguard, they're arguably more important because State Street controls infrastructure. State Street was founded in 1792. That makes it the second oldest financial institution in America after the Bank of New York. For 200 years, State Street has been embedded in American finance. They provided banking services to industrial titans in the 1800s. They financed railroads, steel, and oil. They survived every financial panic, every depression, every crisis. And they did it by being essential infrastructure. State Street doesn't just manage money, they provide custodial services. This means they hold assets on behalf of other investors. When you buy a stock through a mutual fund, State Street is often the custodian physically holding that stock. They are the vault, the back office, the record keeper. This makes State Street invisible but indispensable. You don't see them. But every transaction, every stock purchase, every bond trade flows through State Street systems. They are the plumbing of modern finance. State Street also created SPDRs. State Street Global Advisors launched the SPDR S&P 500 ETF, ticker symbol SPY, in 1993. This was the first ETF. It now has over $400 billion in assets and is the most traded security in the world. State Street controls over $1 trillion in ETFs through the SPDR brand. Unlike BlackRock and Vanguard, State Street is a top 3 shareholder in everything. Microsoft, 4.2% ownership. Apple, 4.1%. Alphabet, 4.5%. Amazon, 4.7%. Berkshire Hathaway, 5.1%. Meta, 4.8%. Tesla, 3.9%. State Street is smaller than BlackRock and Vanguard, but they're a top 3 shareholder in 85% of S&P 500 companies. Combined with BlackRock and Vanguard, the big 3 are the top 3 shareholders in 90% of all major American corporations. But here's where the monopoly becomes unbreakable. State Street's largest shareholders are Vanguard at 7.8% and BlackRock at 4.5%. So Vanguard and BlackRock own State Street. State Street provides services to Vanguard and BlackRock. Vanguard owns BlackRock. BlackRock invests in Vanguard. State Street custodies assets for both. It's a closed loop, a triangle where each company owns and services the others. This is not just consolidation, this is fusion. 3 companies operating as one entity controlling $20 trillion. Let me make the cross-ownership explicit because this is how the monopoly works. Vanguard owns 7.9% of BlackRock. BlackRock owns 0% of Vanguard because Vanguard has no external shareholders, but BlackRock invests client money into Vanguard funds, making BlackRock one of Vanguard's largest customers. Vanguard owns 7.8% of State Street. BlackRock owns 4.5% of State Street. State Street provides custodial services to both Vanguard and BlackRock. State Street owns shares in BlackRock and Vanguard through its funds. All 3 companies vote each other's shares at shareholder meetings. All 3 companies share board members, executives, and advisors.
Why?
This creates a situation where attacking one company means attacking all 3. If regulators tried to break up BlackRock, Vanguard would defend them because Vanguard owns BlackRock stock. If regulators tried to investigate Vanguard, BlackRock and State Street would oppose it because they depend on Vanguard's funds. The cross-ownership makes the big 3 anti-fragile. You cannot break up what owns itself in a circle. This is what Rockefeller's trust tried to do in 1882. But Rockefeller's trust was broken up by the Supreme Court in 1911 because it was one entity with clear ownership. The big 3 are 3 entities with circular ownership, and no regulator has figured out how to break that structure. Now let me show you what the big 3 control, not in theory, in practice, by industry. In technology, combined ownership in Apple is 22.4%. That's BlackRock's 7.6%, Vanguard's 8.2%, State Street's 4.1%, plus other big 3 funds. This is a plurality stake. No other shareholder comes close. The 3 largest institutional shareholders control over 22% of Apple. They vote as a bloc on board elections, executive compensation, and corporate policy. The same pattern holds for Microsoft, 20.5% combined. Amazon, 18.7% combined. Alphabet, 20.1% combined. Meta, 17.2% combined. Tesla, 14.7% combined. NVIDIA, 16.8% combined. In every major tech company, the big 3 control 15% to 22% of shares. This gives them control over board seats, CEO selection, and corporate strategy. Not one of them individually, but 3 acting as one. In pharmaceuticals, Pfizer, 22.6% combined ownership. Moderna, 14.2% combined. Johnson & Johnson, 21.8% combined. Merck, 20.4% combined. AstraZeneca, 18.7% combined. The big 3 are the largest shareholders of every pharmaceutical company. They own Pfizer and Moderna, 2 companies that competed to develop COVID vaccines, except they didn't really compete because the same shareholders owned both. Whether Pfizer or Moderna succeeded, the big 3 won. In energy, ExxonMobil, 23.1% combined. Chevron, 24.2% combined. ConocoPhillips, 26.3% combined. BP, 19.4% combined. Shell, 18.2% combined. The big 3 own 20% to 26% of every major oil company. They own the companies that supposedly compete. Exxon and Chevron don't compete. They coordinate prices. And their largest shareholders are identical. This is horizontal consolidation disguised as a free market. In banking, JP Morgan Chase.
Stop at JP Morgan Chase, and I'm going to pick it up from there after I say this. It's fucked up how we're being played with the monopoly of just 3 fucking companies. Legal Aid Before, coming soon.